Hi, and welcome to a webinar about homeopathy uncertainty to reliable prescribing. I'm Jonathan DeMonte, and here's a picture of me from about a month ago in a lovely town called Morelia in Michoacan, Mexico. Right now I'm in San Miguel de Allende, and this is June 12th actually, and I'm recording a redo of the webinar that was Zoom because I didn't record. Somehow I was handling the settings all wrong. But anyway, it's going to be just fine, and it's the same lecture. So it's a really good one, and I'm looking forward to sharing more. So my hope is that by the end of the webinar, you'll have a really better idea of becoming a certain and reliable homeopathic user. You'll learn that it can be quite simple and also very fast, that it neither takes long to learn and that it can be easy to use. And I hope to give you some resources of reliable information about homeopathy. So there's a lot to cover. And in the preamble to the class, I asked these questions and got a few answers that were interesting. Most people answered A. They loved homeopathy but get lost in choosing a remedy. And some people put all of the above. Not many people put B, and I didn't see a B, and others would like to study more, but that's included in the all of the above. So at the end there was some time for Q&As, and there weren't very many, so you didn't miss on that part. And if you love homeopathy and answered yes to it, you must have used it. You must have had some success with it. And perhaps this webinar will guide you to how to use more of it and use it better. And maybe you just love the idea of it, as it's natural and healthy and it's a good alternative, but you still reach out for other forms of therapy over and above it. So maybe that's because there are so many ideas about homeopathy, and I do hope to open your eyes to knowing its range of effects and its use over believing any of those ideas. And some of those ideas are about it's safe, it's gentle, it's subtle, and I might surprise you with exactly the opposite statements, that it isn't always safe, it isn't always gentle, and certainly not subtle either. So those are beliefs, and one of them as well is that it's hard to learn, it's hard to do, and it takes a long time. And I really want to open your eyes to some tools that will change that, and hoping that you see the possibility that it really is quick and easy. So on the subject of it being hard to learn, so you're here and you must want to learn more about it. And I hope to add to the ideas of how we learn about it as well. So in my belief now, I think we need to have a foundation of knowledge where each step is kind of a platform and based on essential facts and principles that are true, so that each further step is built on a solid platform and foundation of the previous one. And in learning this way, homeopathy becomes really obvious and logical in how to do it. So I do see a lot of homeopaths struggling. And I compare the work of being a homeopath to doing a jigsaw puzzle. So no matter the number of pieces you have in the puzzle, most people will set aside all the straight-edged pieces and complete the borders of the puzzle first. Now, why would we do that? Because there is no doubt about their place. They are on an outside border. And homeopathy is the same way. Certain pieces of information are without doubt and have a specific use. So knowing this, we can apply them where they belong. And this can be made even easier with some reproducible methods that I'll teach you about. So another example is building an IKEA piece of furniture. And we've all seen that you open the box and there are all the pieces, and it looks easy. And just looking at the picture here, you can see there's some quirkiness to that. But the tools are there, you got the picture, go for it. if you're like me, you've done that and made a mess. Whereas anyone that followed the instructions will always have a perfect outcome. That's a very good analogy for homeopathy. And going back to the edged pieces of a puzzle, they can only go on that outside border. You can't argue against that. And we look for pieces of information that you can't argue against. These are how we choose remedies. We argue for a remedy and we argue against a remedy based on facts, not on ideas. So one example is I had COVID, and one of the symptoms was a headache I'd never had before. It wasn't dull, throbbing, bursting, burning, pulsating. It was piercing from the inside of my head to the outside. I mean, sharp, that I've never experienced anything like that. And in choosing a remedy, that symptom characteristic, like a straight-edged puzzle piece, had to be covered by the remedy I chose. So in other words, the remedy I chose has to have that characteristic. It's such a pronounced symptom, so clear, so obvious that the one I chose must cover it. And I think I got it right because I got better pretty quickly. And I actually don't remember what remedy it was, whether it was Nux or Mercurius or something like that. Doesn't matter. Then the other idea is that it takes long. And I can say that that's true sometimes. In the beginning of my practice, I was taught a system of case-taking and analysis. And I did get very frustrated by it. I was taking too long. I wasn't able to hold all the information in my head. And I was extremely frustrated because it just didn't make sense. And I doubted my ability to learn and have a memory big enough. I lost confidence as well. I did take training with other homeopaths, and I took many extracurricular courses, and I attended many conferences exploring all these new ideas that were happening in the 90s and 2000s in homeopathy. And even today, so many new ideas. And in truth, really what I was looking for was just a quicker, easier, and reliable way of practicing. Trying all these methods, I began to see that really all that was new was actually old. And the originators of homeopathy had been through all of that and looking for the same reliable and faster methodology. And so I began to turn to their teachings. And I can say it really helped. And now it's very fast for me. I now know the difference between an outside puzzle piece and one that is obscure and difficult to define where it should fit. And so the secret I want to tell you about is that there is a system that defines these pieces of information, and you don't need to keep it all in your head. So let's look at a little bit of history of homeopathy. And these two pictures I grabbed from my files and just random. So this is the dispensary of the Glasgow Homeopathic Hospital. And I love this picture because it's so pristine, clean, maybe a bit blurry to you, but the polished table, and it's just completely hygienic, and what a pharmacy that must have been. And then the picture on the right is really extraordinary because this is one of the hospitals in the US. This hospital opened in 1904, and as of 97, it was still operating as a psychiatric hospital. That hospital was actually opened by the legislative government of Pennsylvania. And at the time, it had 1,429 beds, 7 homeopaths on staff, and 2 regular doctors. So, homeopathy has an amazing history in medicine. In fact, going back in this timeline, I want to point out that before 1910, there were about 800 remedies in use. And that's a large number. I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to find 800 drugs in a pharmacy. And that's how many homeopathic remedies there were. And then we jump forward to 2024, and in the latest reference book known as the Adonis Repertory by Frederick Schroyans, there are 3,600 plus remedies. And that book is not even printed anymore. It's too big. So that's how unwieldy the information on homeopathic remedies has become. And that's a huge problem. There's just too many. And we don't need to befuddle our brains with more. More is not better always. So why can I say that? Is that I believe that there's in 800 remedies or so, maybe 1,000 that are really important now. There's plenty of remedies to treat most conditions. So our goal, really, as homeopaths, is to have the easiest of choices from the smallest group of likely remedy options. And here you see just a signpost: belladonna one way, aconite the other way. And which one? They're so similar. It always comes down to differentiating a couple of remedies as a good homeopath. So we need to be reliable in that choice, because you have to find a reliable remedy based on the facts of the case, not on some other factor, just what is presented by the symptoms of the patient. So without being reliable, a lot can go wrong. The patient could move to pharmaceutical drug therapy for relief of their symptoms. They could be missing out on this healthier option. They could move on to another practitioner, and you miss out on their patronage. You lose confidence. Not to forget what happens commonly for parents who use homeopathy for their kids. When the grandparents find out that you're treating that cough that's gone on for 2 weeks with pulsatilla, they just freak and think you're crazy. So there's a lot of pressure, a lot of criticism. And yet the good news is that in the history of homeopathy, our founders, the original homeopaths, were very scientific in their approach. And it is their science that still holds true today. So just a little aside, I'm going to talk about me, because many of you may not know that I'm a Bowen therapist as well as a homeopath. I took up Bowen therapy as a sideline to my homeopathic practice because it treats pain. And that's the most common reason people seek help. And it's really good to be able to treat pain in an efficient way. And it was a really important source of referrals to me. But I know that I was a much better physical therapist because I added homeopathy to my work. And this is a picture of my father, who I really admire. He died in 1975. I was about 12, and he was one of the key teachers in homeopathy during its resurgence in Europe in the 1960s. I was very fortunate to study homeopathy through his students. And now, after 27 years, I really feel I've come full circle, and it's time to share my knowledge. So later on, I'll talk about that. And I'll talk about it in a way that I want you to hold in mind that I wished I'd had a very different training in the beginning of my career. So this is my path, very briefly. I graduated as a homeopath in 1977. I became a Bowen therapy instructor in 2001. I lectured in homeopathy at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in the early 2000s. I opened the first Be Well Now Center in 2002, and the School of Bowen and the Bowen-Online training in 2012. And since 2020, I've been working on Homeopathy Simplified, mostly creating the video cases that would be some examples of the treatments and how to work as a homeopath. And actually, the experience of using an online training for Bowen-Online, I think I've really created a much better format for Homeopathy Simplified. So we've got a lot to cover. I want to cover myths and historical facts, the mistakes we make, what to look for when taking a case, and steps to becoming a reliable homeopath. And this is ultimately an introduction to the course, but more than that, it's going to be an education in some important parts of homeopathy. So I know you'll walk away regardless with something useful here. So let's start with myths and misconceptions. And one of them is it's an energy medicine. And here's a very archetypal picture of someone in that field of healing and mindfulness with their chakras and all of that. And it's all real and sure, but not necessarily everyone's version is the same. So when we use homeopathy, we want to be factual. And one of the facts is that it's not energy medicine. There is actually a material substance, despite the high dilutions that we use in homeopathy. So how do I know this? And it's because researchers in India, led by a Dr. Bellavite, a PhD researcher with a team of undergrads, measured particles of the original substance source in homeopathic medicines, even after 10,000s of dilutions. More interesting now is how a person sensitive to medicine, the homeopathic medicine, how do they respond to it? What pathway in the body triggers that? Remember, we give remedies to babies, animals, and plants. All of those respond, but how we actually don't know yet. The idea is hard to learn. Well, it's only hard if you try to memorize many remedies. And I want to assure you that it is not necessary to memorize by rote tons of information. What we need to do is find a way to define a small selection that we can choose between in a simple way. And that's an easy step to follow. It's like you don't need to know every pothole on a street or let me put it another way. You don't need to know every traffic light on the road to work every day. You just need to know that you stop at the red lights and go at the green lights, and then you're going to end up in your destination. Then it's sometimes hard to do. Well, only if you don't have a good foundation or a reliable methodology and a simple way to incorporate it into day-to-day use. So fortunately, there is now a repeatable and scientifically proven method shown to be more reliable than those normally used. Then that it takes long. So using the right tools doesn't take long at all. In fact, nowadays, I used to, in my early days of homeopathy, I'd practice with a 2.5 hour initial appointment. And I've heard of homeopaths using 4 hours. Well, now, for me, it's half an hour, even for a chronic case, 15 minutes for an acute. That's how fast it should be, and that's how fast it can be. So, and that's especially useful if you're using homeopathy with another therapy. This is a big one, that there's no scientific evidence in homeopathy. So I subscribe to a journal named Semantic Scholar, and you can Google that. And it provides me through a term search of homeopathy. It sends me an email with all the latest research on homeopathy. And I get an email almost daily with 2 or 3 papers relating to homeopathy that are published. And that's extraordinary. That's a lot of research being done. Then there's a really good political story here. Europe's Homeopathic Research Institute is suing an Australian organization named the National Health and Medical Research Council that in 2015 published a report on homeopathy, basically saying it's bunk. It's commonly called the Australia Report, and it concluded there's no reliable evidence from research in humans that homeopathy is effective for treating a range of health considerations. The report triggered headlines around the world, homeopathy's a fraud, etc., etc. And then the European Homeopathic Research Institute, argued against that and showed in court how biased this organization was. They only took 5 of 176 valid homeopathic studies to critique in their paper. They didn't use an appropriate scientific method to evaluate those papers. Failure to use accepted methods, standardized methods, failure to obtain sufficiently accurate data to perform a meaningful review, etc., etc., and further bias and so on. So it is interesting how much bias there is towards homeopathy. And some research now just name it ultra-high dilution medicine. They don't mention homeopathy anymore. Back to that ultra high dilution medicine, you have a peanut allergy, they give you a diluted amount of peanut oil, in fact, and that's homeopathy. So that's been done day in, day out by allergists, and yet that's somehow interesting to medicine. And I think it's because it's simplistic. Homeopathy is complex. Here's another myth about homeopathy, that the remedies chosen are selected via the emotions of the patient. Not really. They are, if the emotions of the patient are changed since becoming ill. That's a symptom. So, for example, my sweet daughter is sick, and she's angry at everyone, everything, while she has this flu, let's say. And that's certainly a symptom. However, if she stays sweet-natured during this flu, that's not a symptom. So it's how she normally is. So it's the change that is important. And I could go on about that. But mostly, stick to simple emotions that are those changed during their illness, and don't infer a bigger story than you possibly can and do psychotherapy. It's not what homeopathy is. So now we'll look at the mistakes we commonly make, or not all of us make them. And I would say I still make them. I still give these mistakes good credibility. So the most common mistake is that we define what's wrong with the patient as a disease name, and then we select a remedy based on that disease name. So that happens all the time. If you have a kid, 6-year-old with a cough, you Google homeopathy for coughs and kids, you end up with a list of remedies without any clarity on why they've been chosen or which one might be best. And it's often the way homeopathy is used, and it's extremely unreliable. And don't misunderstand me. There is importance in pathology and the disease, but it's not the way we choose the remedy. We choose the remedy based on the character of the reaction to the disease, the symptoms of the disease. And, we get lucky 1 out of 5 times, let's say, with one of those remedies for coughs, and we give it and it works. And it's like, wow, this homeopathy is great. But it's got to be better than that. It can't be just 1 out of 5 or 20% successful. We need to be above 70% reliable to consider homeopathy useful and worth the money you might expend on it. So a symptom in homeopathy is defined as more than the pathology. It includes the unique characteristics of the symptoms the patient has to their illness, the illness being the pathology. So it's the characteristic of the symptoms. For example, my COVID headache, having a piercing, referring pain from the inside out. Here's another mistake we make: giving the remedy according to the label instructions on the bottle. It's very important to understand that homeopathy is not like a drug. We don't just take 3 pellets 5 times a day. We don't. We want to evaluate the effect of the medicine. And same with Tylenol. If you had Tylenol and you took it for a headache, you don't follow the instructions on the box. You take one and you see if it works. If it works, you wait until you need to take it again. It's the same with homeopathy. And homeopathy is going to stimulate a change in the way your body copes with the problem. And thereby, we need to only take the remedy when it's needed. So, it's not like a drug. It doesn't force our system. And it is a stimulus. Stimulus to the body's behavior to work better. And I won't go into the science of it now because it's too complicated. And yet it's simple. I'll give one little example. If you've ever had too much coffee, you know what that does to your nervous system. You know that you're going to be a nervous wreck, trembling, shaking, wound up, sleepless, highly sensitive to any, loud noise or startle. Now imagine you were like that without having had coffee. We might treat that state of illness with something like coffee and give it homeopathically, because coffee produces that problem. So we treat the symptoms with a substance that produces the similar state. Like treats like. And I'm sure you all know that. But how do we find those things when it's an unusual symptom picture? So other mistakes that's very important to understand is that we often repeat too soon. There should be a double O in too, and too often. And it's not the kind of medicine. Go back to that Tylenol example. You only take it when the headache returns. So same with homeopathy. You would only take it if it helped, and if it got worse, you would repeat it. So I'm going to send a couple of bonuses with this webinar. There'll be a link to all of these. This little chart on how to consider the repetition of a remedy and the weighting. And you can see it's a little blurry probably for you, but the top is first remedy dose. We wait. In the condition of chronic disease, we wait days. In the condition of acute illness, we wait hours. I'll just zoom in and look at this. So here's chronic. So here you have the outcomes that are possible. The symptoms improve, the symptoms worsen. There's no change, and it tells you what to do. Oh, interesting. Even if it's improved, you wait. Even if it's worse, you wait. What's the logic of that? Well, if the symptoms are worse and you think you've got the right remedy, you might see that the patient gets better after they got worse. And it's important to wait. So if the symptoms then improved, you'd wait until they got worse again, and then you'd repeat. Whereas if symptoms changed and it developed into new symptoms, you would actually retake the case. And then no change at all, you would still consider homeopathy and retake the case again and make sure you chose the right remedy. And then the acute is very similar, but in a timeline much shorter. And the only big difference here is that in an acute, you might repeat a remedy a couple of times, even if there's no change. But after a couple of repeats, I would want to change the remedy and retake the case and give a better remedy. And many homeopaths give a backup remedy when treating acutes. They might say, aconite for tonight, and maybe if there's a repetition in the morning, but if there's no change, I want you to switch to belladonna, for example, and we'll use those examples later as well. So anyway, this speaks for itself, and it gives you the idea of how important waiting is. It's a very common aspect of homeopathy. So I will be giving this baby bonus book, and it's a great book. It provides little graphs, little flow charts on how to treat certain conditions in kids. Now, if you don't fit into any of these, don't give the remedy. But these are generally, 75% of kids with constipation or newborns with constipation might well fit into one of these pictures. And we cover colic, rashes, teething, colds, coughs, and so on. And each one of those conditions has a flow chart like this. So you'll get a copy of that. And here's an example of what not to do. Here's two remedies again, belladonna and aconite. Why am I using these? Because they're so similar and they're hard to differentiate. So in this case, the disease is fever. They both have fever. And they both come on suddenly. They're both restless, whereas aconite is worse for cold. Often it's the cause of their fever, whereas belladonna is worse for heat. Maybe they got over too much sun, or maybe they really can't stand covers on them at night with their fever. So heat is an aggravating factor. And that's really what we do in homeopathy. We look for small characteristics of their symptoms to differentiate the remedies. Otherwise the remedies seem indistinguishable. And in this, we've got a very small list of symptoms to differentiate. Mostly we get more. So we often find ourselves choosing between one or two remedies, two or three perhaps. But as long as you're basing those choices on true facts, then you'll make a good one. And in fact, we must first understand really clearly what is a symptom. So it is an expressed or observable deviation in a patient's normal physiological, mental, and emotional functions, where these functions are out of balance and have become pathological to the self, to themselves. It is not the disease diagnosis we are treating, but the reaction or the malreaction, the poor reaction from normal health under the stress of their pathological illness, stress, or trauma. So again, it's the changes in their overall condition that we look at. And we're going to go into those in big detail in about 10 minutes. So here's a case example, very brief. It's just to, highlight that we have ideas about how to treat certain conditions. And yet if you do take the facts of the symptoms, you might really have a different idea. So here's a very intense case. Since age 11, a woman with very bad PMS, diagnosed with endometriosis later in life, had been on naproxen multiple doses per day on the painful periods, during the painful periods. She got the diagnosis of endometriosis, excruciating pain at that point in her life. No way to conceive. She'd seen many gynecologists diagnosed with cysts on the ovaries and went in for treatment of those, and then ended up having a 7-hour surgery with stage 4 endometriosis. Incredibly serious amount of endometriosis. Life crippling. It's in all the organs. So after that surgery, they tried intravenous fertility treatments. Embryos wouldn't hold, then had fallopian tube removed, another miscarriage, then another fallopian tube. Then finally, they did have a successful pregnancy, and, are trying again to have a second child. So very intense, amazed at this person's strength to deal with all of that. So some symptoms. The periods are coming very close together now, as opposed to when 28 days, they're now 23 days. She's taking iron infusions, like intravenous iron. Chewing ice, that's a good symptom of anemia. Hair falling, low thyroid, sleep disorder, and then low energy and so on. So here, what are the usable symptoms? And I'll just show you what I took for the case. I chose period too early, too often, profuse, too much blood, clotted and lumpy, cramps, spasms, convulsions in internal parts, anemia. Better for wrapping up warmly. I didn't list that or talk about it, but that was one of the symptoms. And then better lying on her right side during the period pain. Now, why would I choose just 7 symptoms that don't even talk anywhere close to her mental state or to the anguish that going through all those treatments provided her or led her to have, but just basic physical symptoms and no sign of endometriosis on this list? Well, that's because homeopathy works according to the information that is available. You don't have every symptom available in homeopathy. So from my knowledge, I would use enough symptoms that I could find a remedy and making sure that they are truly symptoms of the case. And there's probably a couple more that I didn't use, but this is enough. And you can see the list of remedies: belladonna, ipecac, cantharis, creosotum, rustox, natcarb, etc. Looking then into books and reference books to differentiate these remedies, I would go and look at belladonna. This is the female section of belladonna in Herring's Guiding Symptoms of 1890, I think, is around the time that this was published. And these are the symptoms. And we can see on 2 pages worth that I cut and pasted, there are a lot of symptoms for belladonna. So I'm not going to say if I gave belladonna or not, or whether it worked or not. The point is that's just to show briefly how I used it. And another way that homeopaths have worked is with what are called keynotes. And these are expected and common symptoms of a patient who uses belladonna. Well, if I look at the keynotes of belladonna, there are very few that relate to her condition. And I've also put keynotes of aconite. Not that I was considering aconite, but just because I talked about it earlier. And, you can have a look at that in your own time. But the point is that keynotes are like saying all English people eat white toast. That's just not true. A lot of English people eat white sourdough toast or something like that. The point is there's nuanced differences. And if you pigeonhole your case into keynotes, you're missing out on what was actually true and factual. Now, maybe cantharis is a better remedy. Maybe creosotum. I don't know. But the remedy I had in mind didn't even show up in this list. So that's why you look at what is factual. These are the straight-edged pieces of a puzzle. Okay, so again, what is a symptom? Let's look in history. So this is really important stuff. So 2 of the most important figures in homeopathy, Hahnemann, Samuel Hahnemann, was the founder of homeopathy. His discovery was the root of everything that I do today. And he was a doctor, famous doctor in Europe, and he became a researcher because he was disillusioned with the drugging that was going on, the cruelty in care facilities. And he wanted to understand why certain drugs could treat certain conditions. Boninghausen was originally a lawyer, and he worked for one of the kings of Europe, I forget which one. And then he became the head of a botanical society and was very involved in the taxonomy of plants, and that's the naming and classifying of them. And he got treated for tuberculosis that was almost killing him by a homeopath, and became a homeopath himself. So Hahnemann, as a researcher, excelled. He developed the method for evaluating the true medicinal effects of medicine. And one of the tenets of that is something called proving. It's called proofing in German. And this is where individuals would meticulously record the side effects of medicines by taking them over a period of time. And a collection of similar symptoms produced would identify the actual medicinal value of a drug. And so he and his followers for many years researched those medicines, and this is one of them. Colocynthis was in medicinal use at the time, and so they proved it. What was it treating, and why was it treating it? So it's known as the bitter cucumber, and they did the proving in 1787. And here you see the description of the symptom it produced, and then in parenthesis, you see the abbreviation of the prover. And I like this name, Lafhammer. He's a doctor that worked with Hahnemann and Rutger and Stapf and don't know what GTM is, Heidelberg. So all these really famous doctors, and they even did double-blind studies of these substances by giving no active ingredient of the medicine to some of the provers. And that's how they made lists of data. And this is exactly how they printed it. So they went more or less head to toe and list the symptoms that were there. And that already was a huge job because there are thousands of lines for these provings. So what Bowen-Online did, he brought his skill as a taxonomist into the task of organizing the data of Hahnemann and his followers. And this is what would happen to a remedy like cholesynthis. Its symptoms would be listed in sections, so it would be more easy to look up the symptoms and see what are the remedies. So this became a reference book, and that is what is known now as a repertory, which means a storehouse of information. And in a repertory, you'll see sections like this called rubrics, and it'll describe the symptom and then the remedies that have that symptom. And further, what Bowen-Online did was he created a grading system for the intensity of each symptom, and that's denoted by the typeface. So here you see italicized, bold, and in belladonna, capitalized bold, and as opposed to ambergrissia, it's just plain type. So there were 4 or 5 categories. There's another 5th, but we only see 4 usually. And this is very, very useful to know the intensity of symptoms. This is, again, plain type is in the remedy is in the proving, or the symptom is in the proving of the remedy, but less often used clinically. When it's italicized, it's in the proving and often clinically useful. And when it's bold, it's the symptoms occur in the remedy and it's often healed by it. And then even better is the capitalized bold remedies. And this is where it's often used clinically. So if you take the distance in time from 1787 to the time when Bowen-Online was working, it's about 50 years of clinical use in these remedies. So there was a lot of clinical data as well. And, this is what they look like, just to give another example. And I want to talk about the most important homeopathy book I own. And it is actually Bowen-Online's Therapeutic Pocketbook of 1846. So this is a translation by Timothy Field Allen from German into English. But the book was originally published in 1846. So why is this so important? It provides me information that is so accurate, so true, because it was the proving material, the early clinical use of Hahnemann and his followers, that they were recording every nuanced detail of those remedies. They're not just saying, it's a shock remedy. No, it's a remedy, with much more detail. Also, it's easily used. It has beautiful chapters and sections, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Plus, the number of remedies in it is only 125. You think 125 remedies versus 3,600? Which would you rather sort through? And I will say that I believe there are plenty of remedies in that 125 to treat most conditions that I come across. And of course I use more remedies than that, but in my day-to-day work, I'm using this. And just the quality of the data, it's so reliable. If it is saying that it's a right-sided remedy in this book, it is the symptoms of the patient have to be right-sided. It's that accurate. So we'll learn how to use this book in minutes only in the course. So how do we use it? How do we go about gathering these pieces of information? And we do that by knowing the questions to ask. That is the key to reliable methods of any homeopathy and homeopaths. The best questions yield usable answers. So to facilitate this, I want to tell you that I now use a checklist. Whether on paper or on the computer, I use a checklist of questions, And that is based on the work of Hahnemann, his provers, and Boninghausen's categorizing those symptoms. And that's all information, almost 200 years old. And it's now been brought up to our modern times by a Dr. Heine Frey. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about him as a big influence on my practice of homeopathy. And his methodology is ultimately what I teach. So I don't want to go into it now because that methodology is only as useful as the foundational knowledge that supports it. But I will say that that method scientifically proves that you can have 70+% success rate with using homeopathy. So we do want to look for nuanced characteristics in symptoms, and that is what provides the information. So let's look at the general areas of that before we move on to any more information about my method that I'm using now. So there are 4 pillars of information that support a reliable remedy selection. And these are pillars of symptoms. And our task as a homeopath is to use only the symptoms of the illness, meaning what has changed since becoming ill. So to define them better, I'll list them as the patient's story. And that's an important perspective, their story of their problem. Then the generalities, those things that are measurable aspects of their illness. Then their general functions, their bodily systems. And then miscellaneous would include the family history, their personal history, your observations, your assessments, things like blood pressure, that sort of thing. So let's look at these in a little detail. What are the important pieces for a homeopath under the umbrella or on the pillar of the patient's story? So the condition, what it is. Is it a rash? Is it in the crease of the elbows? Is it a headache? Is it a ruptured bulging disc? We'll call it that. Then the sensation. How does it feel? You know, what is the sensation of the pain? What is the sensation of the illness? Is it, you know, is it hot? Is it cold? Is it burning? Is it numb? Is it searing? Is it throbbing? Then where in the body and what direction does it feel or move? Does it refer? Now, modalities. These are perhaps the most neglected aspect in learning homeopathy. And yet these are absolutely the most reliable way to rule out or argue for or against a remedy. And what modalities refer to is what are the factors that make a person's symptoms or symptom better or worse. So such as rising from a chair when you have back pain, better when you walk about with an ankle strain, better drinking cold water with a sore throat, or worse when people are around when you've got a stressful time of your life or illness. So modalities, and Boninghausen provided a chapter called aggravations and then a chapter called ameliorations. And most useful in his method are the modalities, what makes things worse, aggravations, and what makes things better, ameliorations. So really, really useful. Now we'll go to generalities. This is all about things such as the time, the weather. So time could be that, the person wakes up at night and it's always at the same time. It could be seasonal. It could be sequential, like every 2 weeks. The weather could be a big factor, whether it's rainy, whether it's dry, hot or cold. These all have effects, and remedies correspond to these as well. Then we talk about their own sense of temperature. Do they feel hot? They may not have a measurable temperature, but they might feel hot. What kind of air do they want when they're sick? Do they want to be wrapped up? Do they want to be by the window to get fresh air? Do they want to be by the fireplace? Then we go to position and movement. And this is really how they manage their pain and what movement does to their pain, for example, or their symptoms. It could be dizziness, and moving is impossible. So we want to know those characteristics of the illness, because this all translates into homeopathic information that can be used to select a group of remedies. Then their sensitivity to external impressions. This could be their nervous system, how it reacts to noise, to crowds I've mentioned, and so on. And what's special about Bowen-Online is that he created sections and chapters where all these are listed alphabetically. Then we go to the general systems, digestion, sexual functions, etc., the body parts, all of that. We go to their systems of sleep and their skin, and then mental states. And one of the arguments against Bowen-Online was that he didn't have a lot of mental characteristics in his symptoms. He kept things very simple, like those simplistic emojis I mentioned earlier. Sadness. Weeping, tearful, sadness. That's one of the symptoms and remedies that are under that. And then anger. We don't go into all the nuanced measures of anger, like anger at your husband, anger at your boss. We don't have that. We just have anger. So in a way, it simplifies and generalizes symptoms. And I like that because it leaves less room for inference. And it gives us really remedies that are truly representative of the symptoms of the case. And then I mentioned earlier how we do it's like a physical exam, basically. The histories of personal and family, and then your measured observations, which these days might be blood work, might be a scan, might be the measure on a sphygmomanometer, blood pressure, etc. So 2 ways that we can use this information and make the work easy. First, gathering it. I mentioned how we use a checklist. And you can see that even in the modalities of weather, we can see that there's not a big list. It's not that detailed. Weather, air, cold, it improves their symptom or aggravates their symptoms. And most of these are simple questions that are easy to get the information from. And most of them, importantly, have both sides. So sitting, it improves or it aggravates. Rising from bed, improves or aggravates. We go to eating and drinking. Swallowing, improves or aggravates, etc. These are very simple to gather, and then we can take them and enter that into a computer program, and it pumps out a list of homeopathic remedies that would likely fit the symptoms of the case. And then we take those to our reference books. A repertory is the dictionary of symptoms and the remedies that have them under their description. A materia medica is a reference book with the details of the remedies themselves. So here in a repertory, we look at the symptoms, we gather the information, and come to a group of remedies, which we then look at in a materia medica. This is what a repertory looks like. I showed a little bit of that earlier. Just lists symptoms and the remedies within them. And then we go to a materia medica to look up the information on the remedy. Now, there are many different materia medicas. This is a very simplistic one. It's called The Primer of Materia Medica by Allen. I think it might be T.F. Allen, Timothy Field Allen as well. And so you can see that there's a description of the remedy itself, then generally what it treats, and then the specifics of different parts of the body. And it goes, in this instance, all the way through to the urinary organs. Very simplistic, and there are others that are much more detailed. So either way, you do reference and look at the materia medica descriptions of every remedy you prescribe. So I want to touch on the course now, and it's, it has some positive information for you as well. So I originally titled this course as one for body workers because I wanted to bring my experience of using Bowen therapy and homeopathy. And then I realized it's not possible to just define homeopathy for one field of medicine, that you have to cover every aspect of homeopathy. So why not bring it to all medical professionals? And then everyone else, why not give the course, if it's that simple, to new practitioners of homeopathy, home practitioners of homeopathy? So that's the genesis of it. And I wanted to provide a really clear history, philosophy, and science foundation, that you would not need to go through endless reams of lectures to get the most important points about these subjects. Then I wanted to be clear on how and why the tools of homeopaths and how to choose them, use them, source them, all of that. And then in all of that, how to use them in the sense of case management. And so there are chapters, and many, many chapters on those. So then we go to methodology. It's rationale, how to implement the methodology, and giving case examples. So all of the cases are in video form, or they're discussed in video form from paper. And they're all really good examples of how to use the method. So the course is basically 3 modules of 17 lessons in each, providing the foundation, the tools, and the method. The lessons are broken into 30-minute videos, or the same lesson in audio version, and then all the details of the courses of the lesson is written as well, with images to accompany that. The course is always lifetime access, because there may be future lessons and there may be a timeline of you completing it that isn't convenient. So lifetime access, I think, is very important. And that allows you to start or pause and rejoin later. And essentially, I'm going to give the course in 3-month sections. And in that 3 months, I'll have a weekly webinar on Zoom where you get to answer questions and catch up and clear things up. And I'll also be available on a forum. But you'll learn a scientifically proven method. The literature and software are included, and you get a certificate, of course, and credits for continuing education where applicable. And just to bring up the difference between online learning and in-person learning, because there are so many schools of homeopathy now. And they're great. They are great. But quite honestly, I would rather have learned what I'm teaching than have learned what I learned in school. I just came out lost in a forest, and I think we do need a path to find our way in this system of homeopathy. And then also, what does it cost to do an online course versus a in-person course? It's a big difference. Now, I also want to point out that, it's great being reliable. And I talked about 20% reliability for most amateur prescriptions. And then early prescribers in their practice might be 40%. But you really do need to have the goal of being 75% effective and reliable, as I've talked about. So what should this cost? You've got the software, the library, the recorded lectures, the live Q&A, the hosting, all of that. You're going to get the access for life. The software, by the way, is a 2-year ownership plan. After 2 years, you own it, and you get the first year for free. And it's $200 roughly and $200 roughly for the second year. So you get the first year for free. And, basically when you see the list of lessons, you'll know that you can just click on it. It records whether you've completed it or not. The image of it is just like this. On the left side, that's a whole web page. I just cut and pasted the quiz to show that on the right. But there's a video and the audio, and then there's the paper, the written information. The quizzes are simple. They just show that you've done the lesson.